Relax to these Southwest true stories and legends. Please leave a like or comment. If you enjoy these desert adventures, hit the subscribe button. The lore of lost treasures has captivated imaginations for ages. Tales abound of pirates burying chests along coasts, explorers losing riches in remote wildernesses, and prospectors happening upon troves in unexpected places. Among these, stories of ships stranded and concealed in deserts stand out as uniquely intriguing. The harsh, dry climates seem incongruous places to find ocean-going vessels. Today, we'll review 3 lost ship legends from California's deserts and consider if the truth might lie behind the myths. Our first story dates back 400 years to 1615, when a Spanish captain named Juan de Iturbe embarked on an epic Pacific voyage. After a successful season harvesting pearls along Mexico's Gulf of California, Iturbe aimed to become the first European to sail clear across the North American continent. His ship held chests brimming with gathered pearls. Iturbe navigated north along the Sea of Cortez and found an inland channel flanked by mountains. Entering the passage, he emerged onto a vast inland sea. Its distant northern shores stretched beyond eyesight. Iturbe spent weeks navigating the sea's perimeter without spying any onward route. Running short of supplies, he resigned his quest and turned about. But upon returning to the entrance channel, he found it blocked by sandbars. Iturbe was trapped inside the colossal body of water. From a tall mountain, he spotted an eastbound channel that perhaps offered escape. But as he sailed toward it, waters rapidly receded, grounding his laden ship on a sandbar. His party finally gave up the vessel and walked out. According to legend, a young Spanish muleteer from Juan Bautista de Anza's party came upon Iturbe's decaying boat 60 years later. Inside lay chests still brimming with pearls. He filled his pockets before heading west to inform Spanish authorities. But he could never relocate the lost ship again. Indians would later tell of sighting its ruins, but expeditions into treacherous deserts to recover the fortune failed. Iturbe's pearl ship remains out there somewhere today. Our next story jumps forward 2 centuries. In 1862, prospectors aimed to sail a small skiff up the Colorado River to reach new gold strikes near La Paz, Arizona. Records confirm a 21-foot skiff was specially constructed in Los Angeles for this purpose. The skiff was loaded on wagons alongside provisions before setting forth into the desert. But en route, the wagons broke down, forcing the party to abandon their unique transport. In following years, Indians reported sighting an ancient boat lodged in remote dunes 30 miles west of Dos Palmas Oasis. An 1870 expedition aimed to reclaim this odd desert prize along with the valuables it might contain, but no records indicate it succeeded. The skiff's fate remains unknown. Our final tale traces to 1892, when 4 men, Santiago, Leonardo, Laredo, and Juan, embarked to recover gold-filled pottery secretly buried by Indians fleeing Spanish conquerors. Their map pointed deep into Baja California's rugged backcountry. Santiago funded the quest, Laredo provided horses, and Leonardo held the map. 2 months later, Santiago returned to his wife Petra with an astonishing report. The men had discovered a massive ship lodged in a box canyon's sandy wash. Though they failed to find the buried pots, Santiago was stunned by the open-decked wooden ship half buried in sand. He described round metal plates covering its sides, not rusted, but gleaming. Santiago sensed the strange ship held mysteries far outweighing any Indian gold. One detail that added to this mystery was the strange writing on the canyon wall above the ship. It was not Native American or English. But Santiago dared not linger or report his find within California due to past troubles with the law. Petra insists all four died without ever returning. But on horseback years later, Santiago pointed out distant peaks where the wondrous ship lay entombed, begging Petra to one day recover its treasures. Before dying, Santiago made Petra pledge to bring a good man back to search those mountains, warning the ship would soon be swallowed by blowing sands. So she wed Jim Tucker, who after years of dismissals grew to believe her. But their age prevented the arduous quest to locate Santiago's canyon-held ship. They could only wonder at its origins and fate. That concludes our review of 3 legendary lost ships of California's deserts. Their origins remain shrouded in mystery and secrecy. Perhaps truth lies behind one or more of these tales, but those who claim to find them met troubles preventing their salvage. The brutal desert climate makes locating and excavating such finds supremely challenging endeavors near the edge of impossibility. Still, these stories stir exciting questions. What if one ship holds chests of pearls? What if another links to Colorado River history? And what to make of the third ship, which was accompanied by inscrutable inscriptions in foreign scripts? The allure of lost ships on desert sands likely will stimulate new generations to comb distant peaks, seeking to unravel their secrets. Rugged deserts and mountains of the 19th century American Southwest, one name struck fear into the hearts of settlers and soldiers alike: Cochise, the legendary chief of the Chiricahua Apaches. For over a decade, this fierce and cunning warrior led a bloody resistance against the encroaching tide of white expansion, vowing to kill any American who crossed his path. Yet behind his ferocious reputation, Cochise was a complex figure, a man of deep honor, intelligence, and loyalty who ultimately sought peace for his people. This is the story of his extraordinary life and the brutal conflict that shaped the history of the Arizona Territory. Cochise was born around 1813 in the Chiricahua Mountains near present-day Pinery Canyon in southeastern Arizona. As he grew into manhood, he developed an imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet tall in his moccasins with a lean, muscular build suited to the hard life of an Apache warrior. His angular features were dominated by a strong, aquiline nose, deep-set obsidian eyes that missed no detail, and high cheekbones that framed a stern, intently focused expression. As the hereditary chief of the Chiricahua Band, the bravest and most warlike of the western Apache tribes, he carried himself always with a regal bearing and solemn dignity. In character, Cochise was a study in fascinating contradictions. He could be emotional yet stoic, philosophical yet bluntly plain-spoken, dryly witty yet capable of explosive rage. A highly intelligent leader and masterful military tactician, he was also deeply superstitious, holding fast to traditional Apache beliefs. For instance, he refused to ever be photographed and once sent a follower to have a white man walk back around a campfire to avoid passing between Cochise and the flames, an Apache omen of impending death. At the same time, he could set aside his own superstitions for the good of his people, such as when he overcame the taboo of using the sacred Dragoon Mountains, believed to be the abode of the dead, as a refugee and base for his warriors. Cochise greatly valued family and was a passionate, tempestuous partner to his wives, whom he had been known to beat in drunken rages. He carried scars on his hand from where his younger wife had bitten him during a jealous fight. Having been taught that pity and mercy were unbecoming to an Apache warrior, he once oversaw the horrific torture of a Mexican captive. But the man's agonized screams haunted him and filled him with remorse, revealing the chief's capacity for empathy despite his harsh upbringing. In the early years of American settlement in Arizona, Cochise enjoyed relatively friendly relations with the few white men in the region, even permitting them to cross Apache lands unmolested. But that tenuous peace was shattered in February 1861 by the incident that came to be known as the Bascom Affair. Cochise was falsely accused by a hot-headed young Army lieutenant named George Bascom of stealing cattle. Lured to Bascom's camp at Apache Pass under a flag of truce, Cochise truthfully denied the allegations. The lieutenant, disregarding the flag's protection, called the chief a liar and ordered his men to arrest him. Enraged and insulted, Cochise drew his knife, slashed through the tent wall, and made a daring escape amidst a hail of bullets, suffering minor wounds. Less fortunate were several other Chiricahua braves present who were taken prisoner by Bascom's troops. Cochise had grown up hearing dark tales of similar treachery by American authorities, including peace councils where the Native Americans were fed poisoned food or where concealed cannon suddenly fired upon them. Now he had witnessed such deceit with his own eyes, and any trust was shattered beyond mending. He swore his terrible vengeance against the White Eyes. The Apache chief presided over an ancient war ceremony in his mountain sanctuary. As his braves chanted and danced around a fire, he raised his war turban with his carbine as an offering to the stars. He then tied it around his head, vowing to only remove it in death. Cochise was now an implacable foe of the white man, bent on bloody retribution. Over the next decade, Cochise would lead the Southwest's longest and most successful Indian insurgency, becoming the most feared and respected Apache war chief. Based in an impregnable natural fortress, now called Cochise Stronghold, amid the boulder-strewn heights of the Dragoon Mountains, he directed a devastating guerrilla campaign against white settlements, mining camps, ranches, and wagon trains throughout southern Arizona and northern Mexico. At its peak, his force numbered some 200 hardcore fighters renowned as the finest light cavalry in the world. The Chiricahua's unmatched horsemanship, desert survival skills, knowledge of the terrain, and sheer endurance made them a lethal, highly mobile strike force. Cochise's warriors could cover 50 to 75 miles a day on foot through the harshest landscapes, appearing seemingly out of nowhere to attack, and then vanishing like ghosts into the wilderness. They perfected the art of the ambush, concealing themselves along remote trails or river crossings to surprise their victims and escape before the army could respond. When water was scarce, the Apaches would make crude canteens by filling a slain horse's small intestine with the precious liquid, a grim but effective innovation. Cochise was a master of guerrilla tactics, rarely attacking well-defended positions head-on, instead picking off small, isolated parties with impunity. His men would surround a wagon train or army patrol, rain bullets and arrows upon the defenders from concealed positions, then charge in for the kill with lances, clubs, and knives before stripping the bodies of weapons and valuables and burning what remained. When columns of bluecoats pursued, the rebels would scatter into the hills along pre-planned escape routes, regrouping later at secret rendezvous spots. Attempts to assault their mountain stronghold proved suicidal, with the Apaches rolling boulders down on the attackers and firing from behind every rock. Cochise had an uncanny sense for the white man's next move, outfoxing even the most seasoned frontier officers sent to subdue him. His network of scouts tracked the enemy's progress, while lookouts perched on peaks would send swift messengers to alert Cochise of impending threats. The chief also befuddled his foes by coordinating simultaneous raids on far-flung targets to spread terror and stretch the army's resources thin. By 1870, with the bodies of settlers, miners, and mail riders littering the desert, and with one of its most formidable Native American fighters, Lieutenant Howard Cushing, slain in a deadly ambush at Bear Springs, The U.S. government was desperate to bring Cochise to heel, but no one could even get close to the elusive leader of the Apaches. The unlikely key to ending the bloodshed emerged in the person of Thomas Jonathan Jeffords, a burly, red-bearded frontiersman and rider for the Butterfield stage line. Realizing he needed to make peace with Cochise to keep his mail routes open, Jeffords rode daringly alone into the heart of the Apaches' lair to meet the chief who had killed any white interloper for years. He was impressed by this solitary white man's exceptional courage. After a long silence, the two men spoke, with Jeffords boldly proposing a private accord. He would stay for several days as Cochise's guest, building trust. The men took a liking to each other, with Jeffords' calm, plain-spoken manner and grasp of the Apache tongue winning the chief's respect. In time they made a pact, even becoming blood brothers through the sacred ritual drinking of each other's blood. Jeffords had accomplished the impossible by befriending the most dangerous Native American in the West. He would be the bridge between two worlds. By 1872, with the U.S. Army exhausted, demoralized, and no closer to victory, President Ulysses S. Grant sent General Oliver Howard as his special emissary to secure a lasting peace treaty with Cochise. Howard located the Apache chief at his stronghold with Jeffords' help and requested a parley. For 11 days and nights, the general and the Apache leader talked, hunted, and ate together amid the granite pinnacles of Cochise's mountain sanctuary. As his warriors and sub-chiefs gathered for a great council, Cochise carefully weighed Howard's proposal. He spoke movingly of how his people had once been proud and free, but were now reduced to skulking in the hills like coyotes, their best young men lost to the white man's bullets. Cochise laid out his terms. "Nobody wants peace more than I do. Give me this place, Apache Pass in the Dragoon Mountains, as a reservation for my people. Let them plant crops and graze cattle and come and go as free as the breeze, not herded into the desert like horses in a corral. Give me my friend Jeffords as the agent to look after them and send away your soldiers. Do this, and the Chiricahua will lay down their arms. There will be peace in the land." Howard agreed, and as the sun dipped below the blood-red crags, the two leaders shook hands. Cochise then uttered his immortal vow as he had once promised war. "From now on, the Americans and the Apaches will drink from the same streams, eat from the same soil, and sleep under the same stars, as brothers at peace." In the final 2 years of his life, he was true to his word, restraining his young hotheads and punishing renegades who raided white settlers, keeping order more effectively than the army ever had. The great insurgent had finally found the peace he craved for his people. In early 1874, Cochise fell ill with an excruciating abdominal condition, perhaps stomach cancer. As he weakened, Jeffords stayed by his friend's side, administering medicines and keeping vigil. On June 7th, Cochise shared a final fireside conversation with his blood brother, reflecting on the profound questions of life and death that haunt all men. "I think I shall die at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Jeffords. What I wonder is whether we shall know each other when we meet again beyond this world." "I don't rightly know," Jeffords replied softly. "What are your thoughts on it?" Cochise pointed a bony finger toward the eternal stars overhead, musing. "It's all a mystery, brother. But I believe that the spirits of true friends and brothers must find each other in the endless sky above, whatever comes after this life. I can only hope it is so." They sat in companionable silence then, each contemplating that great unknown. True to his uncanny prediction, Cochise, the last great war chief of the Apaches, breathed his last at precisely 10 a.m. on June 8, 1874. Fulfilling his dying request to once more look upon the wild ancestral lands he loved, his warriors bore their shriveled leader to a granite pinnacle in the Dragoons. There he gazed out at the sun rising over his cherished Chiricahua range and desert home, then closed his eyes forever. He was secretly buried that day in some cleft or crevice in his sacred mountains, the exact site known only to Jeffords, who kept the secret faithfully to his own grave, as a final act of loyalty to the native brother of his soul. Somewhere in that stony fastness, he sleeps under the stars, alone but at peace, the sage and red warrior whose name echoes through history, a symbol of the Apache resistance forever stilled. Cochise's legacy transcends the Apache wars and the wild, untamed deserts and mountains of Arizona that forged him. He endures as an emblem of the Native American struggle, the human face of the Apache problem, as the newspapers of the day called it. Neither bloodthirsty savage nor romanticized noble warrior, he was fallibly, poignantly human, a man of honor trying to defend his ancient traditions and way of life amidst the unstoppable changes overtaking his world. Cochise, the last and greatest of his kind, has long since vanished into his beloved hills, but his name and legend will echo through the ages. Episode of the Southwest Desert. In this episode, we will delve into early Southwest Desert pioneering and conflicts with the Mojave Native Americans. Also, we will cover the beginnings of Fort Mojave. In 1857, Congress approved $300,000 to build 3 wagon roads connecting the east and west coasts of America. At the time, California newspaper editors complained this was far too little money for the massive project. But the country was divided over slavery, with some states threatening secession. Getting any federal money at all for Western infrastructure was fortunate. Army Lieutenant Edward Fitzgerald Beale was tasked with surveying a route for one of these roads, from Albuquerque to Los Angeles. He was allotted just $50,000 for a 1,500-mile road across barren desert and towering mountains. But Beale had faith the project would succeed. His proposed route followed Old Highway 66, swinging south past Inscription Rock and Zuni Pueblos in New Mexico, then crossing the high deserts of northern Arizona where water and grass could be found. The trail entered Mojave tribal lands along the Colorado River, where the natives guarded the fertile bottomlands and did not welcome outsiders. Seeing the need to protect immigrants who would soon use this road, Beale recommended establishing an army outpost at the river crossing. But action from Washington was slow. A year later, the first wagon train attempted Beale's route, and the consequences were tragic. In spring 1858, a party of men, women, and children left Iowa to try the new Beale Road to California. At Albuquerque, they joined another group, bringing their number to 123 men, 33 women, and 47 children. Their journey grew difficult, with scarce water and grazing. Reaching the Colorado River brought no relief, even though the shining ribbon of water was finally in view after days of thirst. It took 3 more agonizing days down precipitous terrain to actually reach the banks. They made camp in a stand of cottonwoods along the river. But while the immigrants rested, Mojave warriors swam the river and gathered on the far shore, bows held above water. The white travelers noticed, but did not expect real danger from natives with such primitive weapons. Their confidence was grievously misplaced. On August 1, 1858, at noon, the Mojave attackers hidden in the brush let fly a torrent of arrows into the exposed camp. Men scrambled for their rifles while women and children fled to shelter. The surprise was complete. The Mojave killed 8 men from the rear wagons before warriors surfaced to stop the rest from reinforcing their comrades. The immigrants were outmatched, but they put up a bitter defense, fighting for their lives as afternoon wore on. The Mojave finally withdrew at sunset, driving off most of the livestock, their victory complete. Half the immigrants were wounded. With so little left, the pioneers reluctantly retreated towards Albuquerque that night, carrying their casualties and expecting ambush at any moment. Back at the campsite, the Mojaves celebrated by burning the abandoned wagons and supplies. After further deprivation, the tattered remnants of the wagon train finally reached safety. Their terrible experience galvanized public support for Army intervention. By December, mass meetings produced a resolution calling for a military post on the Colorado River to pacify the Mojave. This time, there was no delay. In early 1859, 4 companies of Army infantry embarked by ship for the Colorado River Delta. It was hardly an easy deployment. The ships ran aground. Then soldiers packed into shallow draft paddle wheelers had to slog through 200 miles of shifting sandbars just to reach Fort Yuma. Temperatures over 90 degrees racked the men used to San Francisco's cool climate. They even named their miserable encampment Camp Dirty. Finally, orders arrived to march upriver into Mojave lands. No tents or excess gear came along. Each man hauled his own kit through the barren landscape. The 6th Infantry's veterans mocked the steaming flats near the Colorado as worse than Mexico or Utah. But under experienced mountain guides, David Mackenzie and the famous Joe Walker, they followed the river north, skirting the villages of peaceful Chemehuevi people. Strange glyphs and medicine signs also appeared, possibly meant to hex the soldiers' passage. On April 17th, emissaries from the Mojave tribe arrived, expecting to meet Colonel Hoffman, self-styled Chief of the Tall White Hat. Hoffman informed them he would hold council with their leaders on the 23rd, near Beale's fateful crossing. There, a field of broken wagons and household ruins still lay, including the cottonwood tree where the first emigrant died. It was a charged location for negotiations. On the 23rd, some 500 Mojave gathered as Colonel Hoffman formally raised the U.S. flag for the first time in their lands. A brush arbor kept the sun off attendees. 6 Mojave headmen, including one leader called Kairuk, attended. There was tension as armed soldiers subtly ringed the area, provoking consternation among the natives. The council itself was frustrated by language barriers. An elder of the Yuma tribe played interpreter between English, Spanish, Yuma, and finally Mojave leaders. Colonel Hoffman bluntly threatened destruction upon the Mojave if they continued attacks. They must surrender both the ringleaders responsible for the immigrant attack and members of prominent families as hostages of good behavior. Extreme terms indeed, but the numerically weaker Mojave ultimately acquiesced. 9 of their chiefs went as prisoners to Fort Yuma in irons. This was clearly conquest by intimidation. In subsequent days, the Army selected a site for its new outpost, disregarding pleas to instead locate on the far shore. Their reasoning is unclear, but they prioritize proximity to the Emigrant Trail and Colorado River crossing. With raw materials from the floodplain forest, Fort Mojave rose swiftly. But the heat was just as intense as summer came on. Thermometers read 118 degrees in the shade. Duty here was punishment for man and beast alike. The post was operational for just 2 years before events in the East took precedence. In 1861, during the opening months of the Civil War, federal troops were ordered away to protect Southern California from secessionist intrigues. Quickly, the Mojave resumed their former habits of raiding both settlers and travelers. Only in 1863 did soldiers grudgingly return to man Fort Mojave once more. A visitor in 1871 left us a description of this sun-baked sentinel. It is about 7 miles below Hardyville, close to the Colorado River and hotter than the hinges of any preacher's hell. It is a well-built, clean, comfortable post, and we may suppose far preferable as a summer residence to hell or Fort Yuma, although its occupants claim it is hotter than either of those places. Indeed, Major Pond, the gentlemanly commandant, assured us that he had frequently seen the mercury rise up to stand at 118° in the shade. Surely the troops garrisoning this remote outpost paid heavily in human suffering to realize America's vision of manifest destiny. Their sacrifices brought the first permanent colonial foothold into Mojave tribal lands. While securing vital routes for American commerce and migration, the post also foretold the inevitable decline for the Mojave way of life along their ancestral river valley. We remember the soldiers' endurance, but should also commemorate the price in autonomy paid by Native peoples encountering an irresistible tide of cultural conquest from the East. Few events encapsulate so neatly the costs and benefits of America's march to the Pacific, making Fort Mojave's origins well worth understanding by Western historians and enthusiasts today. Our story opens on a hot August morning in 1854 along the Colorado River. A young German surveyor named Hermann Ehrenberg wipes sweat from his brow as he peers through his transit, staking out a new settlement on the barren eastern bank across from the ferry landing of Dutch immigrant L.J.F. Yeager. Ehrenberg is accompanied by 4 other dusty and travel-worn men, including the ambitious Charles D. Poston, who has visions of colonizing this new southwest frontier. They have just spent 6 grueling months exploring unmapped parts of the Arizona Territory and northern Mexico. Now, at journey's end, they lack the $25 fare to cross the river on Yeager's ferry. Not one to accept defeat, Ehrenberg hits upon a clever scheme with Poston to trick the stubborn ferryman. He sets about conspicuously surveying a 936-acre town site, driving stakes into the sandy soil and sketching grand plans, while spreading rumors of a new rival steamboat landing and a city to be called Colorado City. When word reaches Yeager across the river, he can't bear the thought of competition cutting into his monopoly. He agrees to let the entire scruffy lot cross over in exchange for just 2 of the speculative town lots. And so, in a twist of frontier trickery, the foundations of what would become Yuma, Arizona are laid. But who is this worldly German engineer and adventurer, Hermann Ehrenberg? Our tale goes back to his birth in 1820 in Saxony, Germany. The restless young man runs away from home at just 15 years old, bound for New York. New Orleans is next, where news is crackling with word of conflicts out west. Ehrenberg joins up with the New Orleans Grays militia to fight for Texas independence from Mexico, gaining first combat experience at the December 1835 Battle of San Antonio. In March 1836, Ehrenberg is among 445 captured Texan soldiers imprisoned at Goliad. Just as they ready to celebrate imminent release, Santa Anna's troops receive orders for merciless execution. On Palm Sunday morning, Ehrenberg is forced out with his comrades toward likely doom. But as the firing squad volleys roar out, he throws himself to the ground, surviving along with just 26 other prisoners in what becomes known as the Goliad Massacre. Playing dead in the chaos, Ehrenberg crawls off to the San Antonio River with sword slashes scarring his face. Left for dead again by a pursuing Mexican officer, the scrappy teenager is later freed by General Jose Urrea. Ehrenberg rejoins the Texans in time for their decisive victory at San Jacinto, cementing Texas independence. He sails back to Germany to write one of the first books on the Texas War, helping spur German migration to the new Republic of Texas. Restless again by 1844, Ehrenberg travels overland to the wilds of the Oregon Territory, where he spends 2 years surveying and mapping. His adventures continue on islands across the South Pacific. Then, hearing rumors of gold, He sails to Alta California just as the Mexican-American War breaks out. He serves at La Paz and other hotspots along the Baja California Peninsula before discharge in Monterey, as gold fever sweeps Alta California in 1848. Ehrenberg joins the stampede to the Sierra foothills, spending years mining and surveying claims across Northern California. By 1854, lured by new uncharted frontier, Ehrenberg joins Poston to explore and map the newly acquired Gadsden Purchase lands along the Mexican border. Their information facilitates early American settlements in Arizona. Ehrenberg makes Tucson his home as Poston vigorously promotes their Sonora exploring and mining company. Despite Apache raids and Civil War strife that displaced settlers, Ehrenberg and Poston kindle lasting interest in Arizona mining. By the mid-1860s, Ehrenberg is now a man of some means after years of elusive fortune, but it is not to last. In October 1866, while camping near the Dos Palmas stagecoach station, Ehrenberg is shot dead in the darkness for the $3,500 in gold dust he was carrying. The next year, prospectors establish a new mining camp upstream along the Colorado River across from Bradshaw Landing. It is first called Mineral City, then renamed Ehrenberg to honor the German adventurer who lost his life in the region. For a brief spell, Ehrenberg booms as the liveliest camp this side of San Francisco, according to an 1870 newspaper story. But it is another short-lived southwestern bonanza town. As mines play out and the railroad bypasses its shoreline, the fledgling port dwindles to a forlorn ghost town. Its crumbling mud and adobe walls melt back into the desert. The fickle Colorado River shifts course, abandoning the old landing site, leaving the antique settlement buried in silt and sand. Today, only a small cemetery remains. Weathered headstones and a historic monument remember deceased pioneers like Herman Ehrenberg and the once lively outpost that bore his name. In 1851, a brave yet foolhardy family of immigrants from Illinois set out on a fateful wagon journey that would end in unimaginable tragedy and launch one of the most gripping survival sagas of America's western expansion. The Oatman clan numbered 9 souls. The Oatman parents, their 7 children aged 15 years to infancy, plus a babe in arms. Propelled by rumors of abundant land and gold in California, Royce Oatman turned a deaf ear to the many dire warnings about traveling through Arizona's desert wasteland. He scoffed at tales of frequent deadly attacks by Apaches and other tribes who viewed immigrants as trespassing invaders. So in the spring of 1851, Oatman pointed his wagon train westward into the Arizona Territory, just one tiny caravan crawling over endless miles of arid nothingness toward an uncertain future in California. It was on the afternoon of March 18th, 1851, on the way to Fort Yuma from Pimole. The attack occurred near the Gila River in what was then the territory of New Mexico, later Arizona Territory that fate at last intervened. Royce spotted a band of Apaches heading straight toward them. Before he could react or arm himself, deafening war cries filled the air as the Indians attacked without warning. Young Lorenzo was clubbed violently and collapsed unconscious into the dirt. His father managed a single errant rifle shot before being swarmed and butchered on the spot. Screaming Mother Mary Ann clutched baby Charles amid the onslaught. The Apaches pillaged all valuables from the wagon before setting it aflame. Then they rounded up Olive and Mary Ann as slaves. The raiders presumed they'd successfully killed all other family members. By the grace of God or simple luck, young Lorenzo Oatman was not dead. Hours later, when the moon rose, Lorenzo awoke disoriented in the dirt. Squinting through swollen eyes at the gory scene surrounding him, memories of the attack flooded his mind. Lorenzo spotted the charred skeleton of their wagon atop a 20-foot bluff and staggered up the embankment. Among scattered corpses, he identified the bodies of his beloved parents and siblings, all except absent Olive and Mary Ann. Half crazed with pain, fearing the attacker's return, Lorenzo fled blindly into the moonlit wasteland. He wandered in futile search of his sisters for some time before discovering the Gila River. Exhausted, he slept fitfully on its muddy shores. After days alone resigned to die in the desert, Lorenzo was shocked by two Native Americans riding directly toward him. These men were Pima hunters who meant Lorenzo no harm. Their people maintained generally peaceful relations with white settlers. Too weak to walk, the hunters conveyed the gravely dehydrated, delirious Lorenzo back to the village of Pimole. When he regained strength after days recuperating in Pimole, Lorenzo learned that his two sisters' fates remained a mystery. The Pimas told of rumors that Apaches held two light-skinned girl captives, but such whispers held more hope than certainty. Nonetheless, Lorenzo became obsessed with rescuing Olive and Mary Ann from the raiders who'd massacred their family. Penniless, orphaned, but sustained by a brother's enduring love, young Lorenzo pleaded in vain for the Pimole villagers to send out armed search parties. With settlers few and scattered across Arizona's frontier, such missions were deemed suicidal amid the ever-present Apache threat. The villagers promised only their prayers and some basic supplies for Lorenzo's travels. His body still healing, Lorenzo set out for Fort Yuma on foot to complete the journey his parents died attempting. Now destitute, he hoped to enlist military aid from the fort to locate and retrieve his captive sisters. At Fort Yuma, the officers heard Lorenzo's story politely enough, but soon dashed his hopes with painful candor. Based on ample past experience with Apache tactics, his sisters would have been brutally raped and murdered their first night, if kept alive that long. The soldiers insisted stale rumors of two surviving white girl captives made no tactical sense, and were surely just Indian lies. What use could young girls serve the Apaches? The commander asked. With no skills and unable to bear Apache children, logic meant Olive and Mary Ann must be dead. Lorenzo refused to accept the Army's cold reasoning. But they weren't killed with the others, he insisted. His sisters were out there somewhere, waiting and praying for rescue. Lorenzo swore he'd devote all energy and resources at his disposal to the search, though admittedly meager. Yet Fort Yuma's military community remained unmoved by Lorenzo's stirring testament. They offered provisions to speed him on his journey to California, but refused to dispatch soldiers on what officers deemed a fool's errand into the Badlands. Lorenzo did spark sympathy and outrage from miners, frontiersmen, and settlers who came through Yuma and heard his tragic tale. In campfire circles crackling with curiosity, Lorenzo repeated his saga night after night. At one such gathering about 4 weeks later, the tale galvanized a gang of 9 hardened miners into action. That night, the men voted unanimously to mount a volunteer rescue posse to seek the Oatman girls, raid the Apaches, and punish them for their butchery. Come sunrise, though, Fort Yuma's commander declared no such vigilante party could be sanctioned on a mission he continued insisting was almost certainly futile. The miners reluctantly disbanded. A warm-hearted doctor named Hewitt befriended young Lorenzo for a while, but urgent family matters soon forced the doctor to depart alone east. Yet again, abandoned but unbroken, our brave young protagonist took to the frontier trails in pursuit of his kidnapped sisters. By late 1853, over 2 years had passed since his family's massacre. Lorenzo realized his best chances of mounting a rescue lay in a big city, where wealthy men with resources might take up his cause. So he set his sights on San Francisco, sprawling boomtown gateway for adventurers from across the globe flocking to California's gold rush. But the bright lights and big city soon proved all glitter and no gold for young Oatman. Securing employment was no trouble for the strapping farm lad, but the non-stop hustle for cash left San Francisco's masses no time for sympathy. Lorenzo's tragic tale elicited only chuckles and drinks one night from a crowd of off-duty miners. Crushed, feeling a stranger in a strange land, Lorenzo wrote San Francisco off as a dead end. He drifted south digging for gold himself. By October 1854, Lorenzo had journeyed southwest to Los Angeles, where whisperings hinted Apache raiders held light-skinned captives. Here at last he encountered signs his efforts were having impact. Over years his tragic story had spread gradually across the frontier, even reaching East Coast newspapers. The 18-year-old Lorenzo now cut an imposing figure, thick-necked and broad-shouldered. His tale commanded attention, evoking community outrage. Yet confirming Olive and Mary Ann's fates remained maddeningly elusive. Some travelers reported Apaches claimed no white captives at all, while others repeated the stale rumor that one surviving girl remained hostage somewhere north. With confusion and distance from the kidnapping now spanning 3 years, Lorenzo's various sources grew increasingly suspect. Meanwhile, in Arizona's wild borderlands, the Oatman saga evolved over years of retelling into fireside legend. Whichever version one believed, all shared conviction the lost girls must certainly be dead after years among the Apaches. Lorenzo Oatman simply refused to quit. Our tireless hero crisscrossed the Southwest multiple times, trekking desert paths alone for hundreds of miles seeking tribal villages, constantly inquiring about his sisters. He joined surveying groups when opportunity arose. Lorenzo drifted into the patterns of a haunted drifter, taking dangerous jobs, trading seasonal labor for bunk and board wherever he paused his ongoing quest. At remote campsites, Lorenzo repeatedly told his tale, hoping to gather useful clues. But the next day always found the stranger saddling up solitary again upon another empty trail. By 1856, 5 years after the massacre, the 20-year-old Lorenzo arrived in Yuma, depressed and world-weary. But fortune finally delivered a slender ray of light. An old letter given to Lorenzo contained recent second-hand report from a bush trader named Rowlett, who claimed to have personally met and spoken with Olive. Rowlett vouched a teenage Olive was indeed alive just months earlier, somehow still surviving amid northern Arizona's Mojave tribe after they had traded her from the Apaches. This electrifying update vaulted new energy into Lorenzo's wilting hopes of finally bringing his sweet sister Olive home. He hastily retraced his route northward toward the forlorn heart of Apache country, pushing himself to utter exhaustion. Lorenzo aimed to intercept friendly tribal leaders, hoping they could serve as intermediaries with the notoriously hostile Mojaves and their Apache cousins. The most direct route led straight through the domain of those volatile hostiles Lorenzo desperately hoped to avoid confrontation with. Yet he forged ahead heedless of danger, propelled by newfound faith that beloved Olive still drew breath somewhere ahead. If he could just slip into her captor's camp at night, his stealth and sheer nerve might suffice to sneak Olive to freedom. But Lorenzo's brazen rescue scheme was not meant to be. Barely 1 week into Mojave country, he was spotted and pursued by 3 Native American sentries. A brief exchange of gunfire before Oatman fled on foot into rocky terrain. He scrambled without stopping for hours, up crumbly arroyos and through spiny brush. Finally, after nightfall, Lorenzo stumbled upon the flooded Colorado River. With no chance of escape on open ground, Lorenzo plunged desperately into the powerful currents, clinging to a thick tree branch to avoid being swept under or dashed on rocks. Days later, Lorenzo returned to Yuma feverish and defeated. Though grateful to be alive, despair now fully smothered all hope of rescuing beloved Olive. His daring solo raid had failed utterly. Without money for paying ransom fees or enlisting experienced Indian fighters, realistic chances for success dwindled to nothing. Our crestfallen hero now faced the grim certainty that Olive must remain captive forever, or had likely long since gone to her reward. Perhaps it was time at last for this lone Oatman survivor to lay the past to rest. Thus mired in black sorrow, Lorenzo wandered brokenly west through Arizona and California, and ended up in the town of Monte. Prospects seemed empty for fulfilling relationships or purposeful life of his own. Then, in the sleepy desert town of Yuma, where his crusade began 5 years earlier, sensational news exploded one February 1856 morning to jolt Lorenzo out of his gloomy abyss. A friend galloped up, waving a Los Angeles newspaper and pointing excitedly to banner headlines reading, "An American woman rescued from the Indians." In terse words, the report confirmed beyond wildest dreams that his sister Olive was alive after 4 years of captivity and back safe at Fort Yuma. Lorenzo collapsed, shuddering into the dirt, overcome with release of grief long buried. Lorenzo regained enough composure to travel urgently west the 200 miles to reunite with dear Olive. The dramatic cannon booms and ringing hoorays that accompanied her rescue delivery were described as deafening. Olive arrived escorted by a Yuma Native American named Francisco, seeking promised payment for the lost woman. Her clothing tattered and skin leathery with crude tattoos from mutilating tribal rituals, the fully grown Olive was zombie-like amid the chaotic celebration. Quivering from trauma and malnutrition, her haunted eyes scanned the cheering mob without comprehending. It was a kindly stranger named Grinnell who first greeted Lorenzo days later upon his arrival, providing long-awaited account of Olive's providential rescue. 4 years after the massacre, Grinnell confirmed young Mary Ann had perished. But rumors persisted of the surviving Olive, somehow enduring abuse from the Mojaves after being traded from the Apaches. So Grinnell tirelessly negotiated with all local tribes, personally offering reward for Olive's return, not in dollars but practical barter of livestock, food, and blankets. And one day his righteousness paid dividends. Francisco arrived at Fort Yuma after an extraordinary 400-mile round-trip journey on foot into dangerous Mojave land. He had ventured alone to face Olive's skeptical captors with his promised bounty, out-bargaining the Mojaves to let the woman return home with him. As for details of the highly emotional reunion between Olive and her devoted brother Lorenzo, the earnest witnesses present described it as almost mystical in poignancy. Upon seeing Lorenzo, Olive rushed forth, but the shock of reconciliation was too intense for words. For long moments the siblings fell trembling into tearful embrace, able only to weep openly as they clung together once more. Lorenzo stroked Olive's hair and tattooed face, assuring his sweet sister her horrific trials were finished. Never again would she spend a night in bondage. In days to follow, Olive haltingly recounted her 4 years of captivity since the massacre. Some months after the wagon attack, she was indeed traded by Apaches to the Mojaves for some trinkets. But her frail sibling had not survived the brutality of captivity long. Little Mary Ann had previously perished, unable to endure the chronic abuse and starvation. And now at last, she was in Lorenzo's strong arms again. Though her spirit had been crushed long ago and beauty stolen, the Oatman family nightmare had come full circle. First, they lived 6 months in Oregon off money from the book written about her captivity. She still was not doing well, so Lorenzo hoped to gradually heal Olive by bringing her back east, far from these haunted southwestern lands. Olive's slipping sanity was evident. Episodes of madness tortured her waking hours with violent flashbacks of Indian outrages, episodes that grew worse with time. Emotionally broken long before her unlikely rescue, by 1858 Olive had utterly ceased to function, overcome by traumatic melancholy that would not release its demonic grip. Within 2 years of walking free once more, Olive Oatman died insane, her tormented soul finally extinguished. The tale of how the Oatmans courageously struggled and their terrible fate out west riveted newspaper readers nationwide following the original massacre. Twice widowed by tragedy, poor Lorenzo laid his only sibling Olive to rest, unable to protect her tormented mind. With the last of his kindred gone, the lone Oatman survivor faded into obscure frontier history. So concluded the extraordinary Oatman Odyssey, which touched the extremes of human cruelty and compassion on the American frontier. Thanks to one good Samaritan's perseverance and a heroic Yuma tribesman, Lorenzo's hope was briefly revived when Olive improbably returned from 5 years' captivity. But her second tragic death was no less devastating. Yet the story remains intact of how, against all odds, a lost daughter of Arizona endured half a decade of slavery and surfaced sane enough to walk again on free soil into her brother's arms. Thank you for joining me on this Southwest journey. Before the railroad reached the American Southwest in the late 1800s, the Colorado River served as a crucial transportation artery for the mining industry and military operations in the desert regions of Southern California and Arizona. Navigating this hazardous waterway in shallow draft paddle wheel steamboats demanded exceptional skill, courage, and ingenuity from the boatmen who worked its waters. Foremost among these brave river captains was Isaac Pulhamus, whose long life and career spanned the rise and fall of Colorado River steam navigation. Born in New York City in 1828, Isaac Pulhamus literally grew up on the water, working alongside his father on a Hudson River steamboat. At age 18, young Isaac joined the throng of Argonauts drawn to California by the discovery of gold. After an epic 327-day voyage around Cape Horn, he tried his luck at placer mining on the American River. But when a flash flood swept away all the supplies he and his companions had laboriously hauled in, Pulhamus decided to go back to doing what he knew best. He hired on as a steamboat hand on the Sacramento River. By the early 1850s, sailing ships from San Francisco were making regular runs to the mouth of the Colorado, where they exchanged freight with shallow draft paddle wheelers for delivery to settlements and military posts farther upstream. In 1856, Isaac Pulhamus relocated to the tiny steamboat landing at Yuma, Arizona, to take a job with George A. Johnson's Colorado Steam Navigation Company. At that time, Yuma's entire population could fit comfortably inside the settlement's only permanent structure, a 100 by 25-foot adobe building divided into 4 rooms. 2 of the rooms served as office and warehouse space for the navigation company, while the other 2 were occupied by the general merchandise firm of George F. Hooper and Company, together with his friend and fellow New Yorker David Neer, who became the steamboat company's chief engineer. Pulhamus worked to establish Yuma as the key transshipment point for goods moving between San Francisco and the mines and military installations of the Gadsden Purchase lands. The deck crews of the company's paddle wheelers were made up entirely of local Native Americans, who were paid 50 cents per day. As the Native Americans could not count money, each crew member kept track of his days worked by tying knots in a string worn around his neck. On payday, the captain had to hand each man a separate half-dollar coin for each knot in his string. In addition to being a resourceful commander, Isaac Pulhamus was widely regarded as the most skilled pilot in the Colorado River trade. He performed many notable feats of riverboat handling in the course of his long career. In 1859, battling the Colorado's powerful current all the way, he required a full 28 days to force the steamer Mojave upstream from Yuma to Fort Mojave, a trip he could easily make in the opposite direction in a single day. Father Paul Figueroa, a Yuma historian, recounts the story of how Pulhamus once managed to navigate a particularly difficult stretch of rapids below Fort Mojave by running his steamboat through the canyon stern first, turning the vessel around midway, and continuing bow first to safety. By 1860, Pulhamus and his friend David Near had established themselves solidly enough to consider taking some time off to visit family and friends back east. They made the long overland trek to St. Louis by stagecoach, their progress impeded by an Apache attack in Arizona and a buffalo stampede in Texas. The journey took 15 days. The captain's longest voyage, however, may have been his tortuous trip to the altar. In 1865, Isaac Pulhamus fell in love with Señorita Sacramento Sembrano, the beautiful daughter of a landed California family that owned a large cattle ranch along the Colorado near La Paz. The fact that Pulhamus spoke no Spanish and his intended spoke no English was only the first obstacle the couple had to surmount. With no Catholic priest closer than San Diego, the captain ended up having to arrange for a padre to be brought to La Paz by stagecoach at a cost of $500. This at a time when a house could be bought for $200 and a cow for $5. The Pulhamuses went on to have a long and fruitful marriage, raising a large family. The coming of the Southern Pacific Railroad to Yuma in 1877 meant the end of George Johnson's Colorado Steam Navigation Company, but Captain Pulhamus simply went into business for himself. Despite rail competition, he continued to operate his own fleet of steamboats until the federal government completed a diversion dam across the Colorado in 1904, blocking commercial river traffic. Even after he retired from active steamboating, the captain still liked to take Yuma residents on festive picnic excursions up the Colorado to Picacho every May Day. On his 88th birthday in 1916, the town's Elks Lodge and other civic groups came together to celebrate their most famous founding pioneers' 6 decades of contributions to the development of Yuma and the surrounding region. Isaac Pulhamus died on January 16, 1922, aged 94 years. In tribute to the captain who had given so many of their tribal members their first jobs a generation earlier, hundreds of Native American mourners lined the walls surrounding the Pulhamus home. For 2 days and nights, the Native Americans kept a vigil, warming themselves by a bonfire and chanting softly. Inside the home, more than half a century's worth of logbooks, charts, and other river memorabilia preserved a vanishing way of life. Isaac Pulhamus's Mexican-born wife Sacramento preceded him in death. The couple left a large family of children and grandchildren who adored them both. One of the captain's granddaughters left this moving recollection of the old Colorado River pioneer. Grandfather was rigid in character, firm, and his voice was deep, resounding. When he had something to say, it was said briefly. It was well worded and to the point and always carried weight. He had the respect of all. Despite his stern, outward demeanor, however, I found him one of the kindest, most lovable, and understanding hearts I have ever known, and I considered him the best companion a child could have. Joining your desert frontiersman, Alan. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like or comment. For further desert romps, hit the subscribe button. Happy trails!